Well, thank you for joining us in this week's edition of Walking the Talk. We focus on the Financial Reporting Center. My name is Catherine Achenga. Now, what is really the role of the financial reporting sector? That is the question that we are seeking to find out today. So the first thing we are going to do is we went out to the public to find out just how many of them know about the Financial Reporting Center, and particularly issues to do with money laundering and financing terrorism. And this is what they had to say.
Financial Reporting Center, to my best of knowledge, I think it's reporting the withdrawal and deposits of cash in banks for maybe public servants. Yeah, they report to the government, but the government, I don't know whether they do something about it, about the reports.
Yes, I know of financial reporting centers. So basically their work is to report on the financial issues on the ESCC, and the ESCC now is the Ethics and Corruption Commission is an independent body that is established under the Constitution, and it is mandated to ensure that there is no corruption in terms of the running of the government.
Hasa tuseme mtu wa kawaida kujua mambo yale wanafanya, yani hili kitu inaendelea ni vigumu sana kujua.
The financial reports, those are organizations that have been set to handle how the finances are being controlled, and if there is any issue of divergency of the issues of finances, then they are mandated to report to the ESCC.
I don't know about the Financial Reporting Center, but I do know of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Center, and I think their mandate is to fight corruption and to reduce it in the country. However, I think there's so much that needs to be put, because each and every day we hear of corruption cases, money that has been laundered, and I think it's something that as a country all together, alongside these institutions which have been put, that we need to fight together.
Welcome back. That is the word on the street. And now we get into the nitty-gritties. And for more details of this, joining me this evening, I am talking to the Director General at the Financial Reporting Center, and that is Saitoti Maika, who will be putting into perspective what really is the role of FRC and have they been able to clamp down on money laundering and financial terrorism. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
Let's begin with, what would call the data. Many Kenyans obviously not seeming to know what FRC does, not even know what money laundering is about. Let's talk about your mandate. What is it that you do as FRC?
First and foremost, let me take this opportunity to thank you for giving me an opportunity to inform Kenyans of what we are doing to protect our economy against money laundering, financing of terrorism, and by extension corruption. The Financial Reporting Center is a state body, a state corporation established under the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2009 with the sole mandate to identify proceeds of crime and money laundering. And what I mean by this is that we are tasked with the mandate to ensure that our economy is not exposed to ill-gotten wealth or dirty money for that matter.
Yes.
And that money is not invested in our economy.
So the genesis of the setting up of FRC, what prompted the government to go in this direction?
Two issues. For the longest, investigations have always focused on the predicate offense. What I mean by the predicate offense is the offense that are predominantly offenses as defined in law. And it was a big challenge to follow the money, because what hurts most criminals is when you go for the money, because you can send someone to jail for the longest period, but after the jail term they'll still be able to enjoy the proceeds that they had stolen from the public or from even a private entity for that matter. So the government realized that we have to go for that money. And that's how we ended up having a legislation in place to ensure that as much as we send you to jail for the predicate offense, we still have to go for the ill-gotten proceeds. and take them away from the criminals.
Okay. Let's focus on the 2 years that you've been in office. What would you say are perhaps some of the achievements that you've been able to do? We like to talk about the first 100 days in office. You're way beyond that.
The first 100 days in office were being challenged for me because I came in at a time when the center has operated on sort of an interim basis. We've had 2 directors, interim directors before that, who really didn't have the sole mandate to be able to start up the institution and have it operational as required by law. And what I mean by this is that for that period, before I came in, the center did not have any full-time employees. We were basically having seconded employees. Yeah. So the biggest challenge in the first 100 days was to ensure that the process that had been started to recruit staff and acquire new premises for the staff had to take off. And I think by and large we succeeded because within the first 100 days we were able to conclude that process of procuring new premises as well as finalizing the recruitment process and ensuring that we've started that process and gotten to a point where we're able to interview and able to have those staff in place.
So what is your personnel right now? How many staff are you at FRC?
Currently we are 35. And beyond the 100 days, I embarked on a process of inward looking. What I mean by this is that we looked at the threats, we looked at the vulnerabilities, and we looked at the strength of the Financial Reporting Center to deal with that. Initially, the establishment that was approved before I came in had a strength of 65 members of staff. And having looked at that, we realized that, or rather I realized that the 65 might not be adequate to execute the mandate of the Financial Reporting Center. So I requested the Anti-Money Laundering Advisory Board, which is a board that is also established under the same act, to help in putting up policies. And
you also chair the board, yeah?
No, I'm the secretary to the board. I'm
sorry,
secretary
yeah.
to the board.
Yeah.
That, in my own estimation, we needed to have an expanded establishment. And the board agreed, and we wrote to Treasury seeking a review of the establishment. The process is such that Treasury or anybody that is established under the State Corporations Act has to get approval from the State Corporation Advisory Committee, which goes by the name SCAC. So we wrote to SCAC, of course pursuant to approval from Treasury, requesting a review of the establishment, in which graciously SCAC came in, went through a process of almost close to 4 months, in which we ended up having an expanded staff establishment of 105. Out of the 105, it's structured in such a manner that 70% of that 105 are technical staff, and the other 30 are support.
So are they enough to be able for you to undertake your mandate, or it's still work in progress?
It's still work in progress because, by and large, our processes are entirely dependent, not really entirely dependent, but are largely dependent on IT. When you're looking at analytics, data analytics definitely require IT process. When you're looking at case management processes, you require IT. When you're looking at the normal workflow processes, you require IT. But at this particular point in time, I think, and I believe the 105 are sufficient.
Sufficient.
Yes.
All right. What are some of the things that you would say are still pending that you would want to do to be able to work at full capacity?
One is to have the full staff complement in place. We've already requested for an expanded, not really expanded, but we've requested for additional staff. Of course, you know that government is currently going through a rough patch in terms of resources.
We have already a big wage bill.
Yes, a big wage bill, so we requested Treasury to allow us recruit another additional 50% of the current staff strength to be able to really now operationalize the center to a level where we think we are optimum in terms of the capacity that we need. And then secondly, looking at the law, we still have a few deficiencies that are still there. One of the deficiencies is the issue of the lawyers to be able to report suspicion, just like the other financial institutions.
Okay.
This has been a very contentious issue because I think we've taken the matter twice to Parliament, the last being, I think, August this year, and we were not able to have that in place. And that still remains a serious deficiency, because as we tighten the noose around criminals and the opportunities they have to launder their proceeds, particularly within the financial sector, they're now looking for other avenues. And one of the vulnerable avenues that we've noticed is the issue of lawyers being able to transact on behalf of individuals,
of their clients.
Yeah. And the word client now becomes an issue for us, because no one is saying that all lawyers are involved in this, but just like the general society, there are those who are abetting crime. Abetting crime in the sense that they are able to hide proceeds for clients who are actually criminals.
So what difficulties are you facing in trying to get, Parliament to be able to listen to your concerns and perhaps look at this as something that we need to look at?
We've reached out to Parliament, and I can say we've reached out to Parliament aggressively. We've had sessions with the relevant parliamentary committees, but it's still a challenge convincing them that we actually need to have the lawyers as reporting entities under POCAMLA, the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act. The last attempt in August, it wasn't really an issue that Parliament said no. The communication from the Speaker of the House was that we placed that particular amendment through a wrong process. That's through the finance bill. So we say it was unprocedural for us to do that. So we are looking at doing that the right way, bring a substantive amendment to the Act to ensure that it's placed before Parliament in the right manner.
Do you perhaps just see it in the light of day, given the lawyers are always going to argue the client-lawyer privilege in what you disclose?
I think this is a notion that has been peddled, which is anchored on falsehood. Because if you look at what we are doing, amending that particular relevant section, we are only including the word legal profession. And the legal profession is wide. It includes lawyers. Already, that particular section that we are amending is applicable to accountants. And accountants have been reporting money laundering suspicion to FRC. And there are only 5 instances in which the application of these particular provisions of this Act apply. So we are not touching on anything that touches on confidentiality or client privilege, client advocate privilege. We are basically saying in a situation where a lawyer handles money on behalf of a client, he has a duty to ensure that he gets to understand the source of the money, the source of the funds that the client wants him either to invest, hold in trust, or even transfer elsewhere.
All right, let's talk about the institutions that currently you are mandated to work with. Where are some of the institutions that are required by law to actually report to FRC whenever they notice suspicious financial transactions?
We are cooperating with law enforcement agencies. That's a Directorate of Criminal Investigation, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, and the Asset Recovery Agency. Those are the 3 main law enforcement agencies that we cooperate with. And of course, as provided for law, all the regulators are defined as supervisors under our Act. The Central Bank of Kenya, the Insurance Regulatory Authority, Capital Markets Authority, Betting and Control Licensing Board that regulates the gaming industry in Kenya. We have the Real Estate Registration Board, Agents Registration Board. Yeah. And the reason why they are classified as supervisors, it's because the Act looked at regulating all sectors where money is transacted. Yeah. And it's highly unlikely that one institution will be able to carry out that mandate. That's why, even within that particular sector, Central Bank handles banks, IRA deals with insurance companies, CMA deals with the securities sector. So to be able to effectively supervise for money laundering purposes, anti-money laundering purposes, and combating financing of terrorism, the law has bestowed upon these supervisors the mandate of also regulating for AML CFT purposes. The law says that this becomes a legislative mandate of each and every body that is defined as a supervisor under our Act. And as much as we share intelligence, because basically what we produce in FRC is intelligence, we share what we think are weak areas regulators need to look at. For example, in the case of, I'll give an example in the case of the NYS scandal, where there was either deliberate commission of an offense of abetting money laundering, or even a situation where it was by default. What I mean by this is a situation where, due to capacity constraints, maybe a financial institution is not able to see, because to see an issue that is leading to a vulnerability, maybe in the case of assessing documents that are provided. So in a situation where we realize the bank has those weaknesses, then the regulator should come in and look at the internal control processes, the capacity of those who are handling the money, the reporting or compliance function. And that's their role now to do that. And that's why we share intelligence with law enforcement, but for the regulators, we share issues that need to be addressed from a regulatory perspective.
Okay. When we talk about, dirty money, because we keep referring to money laundering, what really constitutes dirty money?
Dirty money is dirty money. Dirty money in the sense that these are illicit proceeds. And of course, the literal meaning of illicit is something that is illegal. It's a situation where an offense generates money or proceeds. So out of that process, that there was an illegality and there is something that is accrued out of that illegality, that becomes dirty money. And then that dirty money has to be, criminals are very clever people. And they know that dirty money can be seen from far. So what do? They either hide, they either move, or they convert those proceeds. And that's where money laundering comes in. So basically money laundering is a process. Yes, kuosha pesa. Okay. And that's basically how money laundering comes in. You're trying to give illicit gotten proceeds a legitimate source, or a legal source for that matter.
Do they still, largely use the banks to clean this money, or are there other avenues that now they're beginning to realize you're all focusing on the banks, so they need to wash this money elsewhere? Wash, quote unquote.
I'll tell you that criminals do a lot of research. They do a lot of research before they embark on what they are doing. And as we continue highlighting the vulnerabilities that financial institutions are facing, they are also devising new ways of hiding the money. What used to happen maybe 2 years ago is not what is happening now. The way maybe proceeds of NYS 1 were laundered is not the same way proceeds of NYS 2 was laundered. So what I can tell you is this is an ever-evolving scenario where one criminal might not necessarily launder proceeds the way another criminal can do. This criminal will probably get into buying real estate. There's a criminal who will give that money to a lawyer, for example. Reason, I want to purchase property, either land or real estate. And then 3 months down the road, he comes back and says, you can go ahead and purchase that property, but don't register in my name. Register in a company that is incorporated in Kenya but is registered offshore. It becomes very, very difficult for law enforcement maybe to lay their hands on that. He can even decide, send this money to a trust, in which probably one of his sons or daughters is a trustee. Yeah. So this is how now, these are how criminals are able to evolve on a day-to-day basis. So as we put in place regulations, we put in place mechanisms to deter the financial sector being abused for money laundering, they're also looking for other opportunities to hide the proceeds.
What about for smurfing? Are you able to track that?
I think for smurfing, it's a very easy way to track, because basically smurfing is a pattern. If, for example, Currently, the law says $1 million and above, $10,000 equivalent should be reported, whether suspicious or not.
Yeah.
But you find smurfing comes in when you actually beat the 1 million requirement. So you deposit 800 today, tomorrow you deposit 950, tomorrow you deposit 700. For us, there's a pattern that is a red flag, an automatic red flag. So for smurfing, I think is the easiest way to detect money laundering. But again, the criminal who's doing that is also aware that actually this is likely
To raise suspicion.
to raise suspicion.
Yeah. Right. Let's look at perhaps some of the cases that you've been able to, prosecute when it comes to money laundering in the time that you have been in office.
Prosecution is not within our mandate.
Just to refer.
Yes. Our core mandate is to produce financial intelligence. So we provide law enforcement with financial intelligence, and it's their business to convert that into evidence. But basically what we give law enforcement is almost a good case to prosecute. And when you're talking of intelligence, I may not be able to give specific cases. Maybe
And
the
are
ones
there
that
some
have
that
appeared.
the intelligence that you provided ended up in prosecutions?
Yes.
Yes.
I can tell you for free that if you were to do some reverse on every case that has been prosecuted in court, 90% is from the Financial Reporting Center. Because at the end of the day, the easiest trigger is you trying to change your pattern. And the way you change your pattern is either you acquire property, either you deposit money in the bank, you are buying shares, or even you are trying to use someone to hide the proceeds. Mm-hmm. And since that someone has always had a pattern or a profile within a financial institution, that raises a red flag. Mm-hmm. And that constitutes now the suspicious transaction reporting that institutions file to the Financial Reporting Center. Mm-hmm. So almost all the cases that you see in court, NYS 1, NYS 2, all the cases that you're finding that are before court related to corruption, we've had a role to play in ensuring that there's evidence, there's intelligence that's converted to evidence by law enforcement.
And the financial reporting, companies, are they really working with you? Are they giving you data as they should? Or is the system, seamless enough for you to be able to analyze this data when it comes in and act before time?
Reporting institutions will refer them those agencies that report to us are referred to as reporting institutions, and they are classified in law. And it's an obligation that is anchored in law. But in practice, the reporting is obligatory because it's the financial institution that determines the suspicion. It's not the Financial Reporting Center. It's the financial institution that looks at the pattern, looks at the profile of the client, and they're able to tell that there is a shift from the pattern that we knew about this person, and that raises suspicion. When that report is filed with the Financial Reporting Center, we look at that particular case based on that profile that the financial institution had already defined on this person. We're able to look at, if you're an employee, we're able to look at your employment record, we're able to look at your income, of course the salary, we're able to look at the pattern that you've always had, looking at the statements that you've probably the last 2 or 3 years. And then we're able to gather more from any other institution. For example, ESCC, we can request ESCC, have you had an issue of corruption on this person? We also look at our own database, internal database, and we look at other public databases, including the social media. The social media is a very, very useful resource. As much as everybody seems to think that social media is all about a lot of hyperness on issues that are not necessarily important. But for us, the social media is very important. Your own profile picture on WhatsApp speaks a lot about you, if you have one. If in the background there's an expensive car, we'll wish to know whether you own a car. We query the NTSA database. If you own a car, does it fit within your own income profile? It doesn't. That again is a red flag. So based on that, we're able now to build a profile, we're able to build a case, and we give our own reasons why we think that actually we are involved in this particular criminal activity, be it corruption, embezzlement of public funds, drug trafficking. And then law enforcement is now able to follow those leads that we've given. And in a situation where there are proceeds we've already identified, then they should be able to follow the money beyond where we've reached.
Based on the data that you have gathered, would you say incidences of money laundering are increasing or they're decreasing?
I won't say that they're increasing. I look at it positively that they're decreasing. And the reason why I say this is that anybody who is now involved in any illegal activity in this country is doing that well aware that someone is watching you. So the way they are placing the money, the way they're investing, the way they're moving ill-gotten proceeds becomes now a challenge for everybody. And for us, I think we want to walk the talk. Walk the talk that crime does not pay. So you take the money, we'll still come for it.
Did the demonetization process perhaps help in trying to clamp down on money laundering?
One of the objectives of that process was also to try and track down any illicit proceeds that are not necessarily within the financial system. We have concluded that exercise. We are due to produce a report which will give a snapshot of how dirty money could have entered the financial system. So I won't be able to really comment much on that. We are still trying
when
to
are you planning to release the report?
We intend to conclude, probably even in a week's time. But again, we will not share that with the public. We'll share with the relevant agencies that are involved in that process.
Okay.
Of course,
All right,
central
let's
bank
look at
and
it
central
from the perspective
office.
of the Kenyan people. Are they, helping, the government institutions like yours when it comes to trying to track some of this illicit money? And Kenyans bringing to your attention people who, get wealthy overnight?
I look at Kenya in the context of all of us. All of us, the public, the financial institutions, law enforcement, and everybody who's a player in the fight against corruption. And Kenyans have tried their level best to put pressure on everybody who has a responsibility, including us. If you look at the reaction of Kenyans anytime there's a scandal that is exposed, it tells you that there is pressure that is brought on those who are responsible to ensure that corruption does not happen, on those who are supposed to investigate, and making everybody accountable for their actions, either failure to stop corruption or abating corruption. And that has worked.
Okay. We'll look at some of the loopholes that perhaps have been exploited in money laundering, but that is after this short break. Indeed, we are glad that you're watching Walking the Talk. Our focus of discussion this evening, we are looking at the Financial Reporting Center. What is their role in trying to clean up dirty money, to try and ensure that those who have dirty money out there are actually brought to book, and we have money that is not being used to finance terrorism sometimes that often comes from money laundering. So indeed, I'm engaging the Director General of FRC, that is Saitoti Maika, who is giving us more insight. But for now, let's take a quick break, but we'll be back in just a bit. Welcome back. If you're joining us, you're watching Walking the Talk. Our focus of discussion this evening, we are looking at how really do we tackle the problem of money laundering, financing terrorism. All that falls within the mandate of the Financial Reporting Center, just trying to follow the money and analyze the data and use that data to make some of the determinations and also understand where illicit money is being hidden and how it is being used and get the brains behind this particular illicit trade. And of course, if you're just joining us, we are discussing with the Director General of FRC, Saitoti Maika, who is giving us more insights. So let's just look at, from the point of view as you move forward, what would you say are perhaps what you'd say the measures that you have put in place to be able to discourage money laundering?
Thank you. One of the measures is to empower the financial reporting institutions. Is to build capacity to ensure that as gatekeepers, they have the right skills and tools to deter the institutions from being abused for money laundering. One of the provisions of our Act is that the Act requires us to design training requirements for reporting institutions, and we may provide that support to train the institutions. We are taking upon ourselves that the may that is discretionary in law should become obligatory. Because if we empower the gatekeepers, if we have banks being able to deter money laundering, even dirty money getting into the system, it's good for everybody. It's good for the economy, it's good for the banks from a reputation point of view, and it's also less work for FRC. And that's, of course, will have been able to deter any person who would wish to launder proceeds of crime. Secondly, we are also crossing ranks with our partners in law enforcement, also to build the same capacity, because if we are able to produce the best intelligence and they are not able to act on that intelligence, either for lack of capacity or lack of the human capital, or even the skills for that matter, then it becomes a challenge. Actually, it becomes pointless for us to have that intelligence in the first place. So we are partnering with them to also build capacity within those institutions. Same for the regulators. Money laundering is a contemporary subject. So even within the regulators, there are some who are not able really to understand what money laundering is. For example, the biggest debate currently is the issue of the gaming industry, the betting companies. The question is the regulator able to deal with the issue of betting and even money laundering through betting? So again, we also need to look inward and see that we have those who are within the system who are supposed to fight money laundering, at least to ensure that they have those skills. Thirdly, is the issue of building partnerships. It should not just be an issue of complying with the law. I think it's the issue of us being able to be together in this war, us being able to speak to each other. I know normally it's very hard for law enforcement to speak to anybody. And that's why for the ordinary Kenyan, when you see a policeman stopping you, the first thing that you're thinking is, I'm on the wrong. How do I run away? We want to reverse that. We want the public, we want the reporting institutions and anybody who's within the framework to be able to see the Financial Reporting Center as a partner. And fourthly, the Financial Reporting Center itself, we should be able to have the capacity that is commensurate with our mandate. And I think the government has really done a lot to support us in that. We probably have, I'll say, the best premises right now. You are here and you can see. We have a budget that, by and large, under the current economic constraints, is sufficient for us to carry out our work.
What about going after the money that is being hidden outside the country?
Again, the law provides for us to be able to do that. One of the provisions of POCAMLA is that we have powers to share intelligence with any other financial institution, financial intelligence unit outside of this country. Of course, for us, we are the financial intelligence unit in Kenya. So the law empowers us to share that information. The law empowers us to enter into any agreement by way of MOU to be able to share that intelligence. And of course, on a basis of reciprocity. And that in itself will help us to either request or even provide intelligence that we think our partners across the borders can use to follow the money and help us probably recover that money. Currently we have 18 MOUs with the foreign financial intelligence units. We have a working relationship with some of them. 2 weeks ago, we had a team of analysts attack to Jersey Financial Intelligence Unit, where they were able to benchmark, where they were able to understand how money is laundered in an offshore tax haven. And of course, Jersey for us, definitely you are aware of Jersey. Kenyans have heard of Jersey. We have a pending issue before the Court of Appeal on a case that is related to money laundering. And being able to build those partnerships make our work much easier. And for the benefit of Kenyans also, currently we applied for membership of an institution called the Egmont Group. The Egmont Group is a global grouping of financial intelligence units. Currently, its membership stands at 164 members. The moment we join that group, we have access to 164 jurisdictions where we don't require any mutual legal assistance to query or to request for information or intelligence. So we'll have a latitude, yes. Yeah. That eases our work.
Mm-hmm. What about for those foreigners who come to hide the money in Kenya? Are you able to track them? Those who want to invest here yet they have committed crimes in their countries?
Criminals are criminals. And I think the moment they're in this country, they are within the provisions of POCAMLA. What I mean by this is that if they're investing, definitely money has to flow, unless they're coming with the money in gunny bags. And for your information, even if they're coming with the money in gunny bags, then it means they will not pass through a declared immigration entry point. Because within the law, if you enter this country through an declared immigration point, you have to do a declaration of how much you have. It's not an offense to come in with money, but you have to declare. Again, if they're using the financial system, either banks or even the security sector, the same law applies where you have to declare the source of your funds. The bank has to carry out some due diligence. Of course, they must carry out the KYC, know your customer principle, providing information that is verifiable. And then where they think there's suspicion, they can even request FRC that we have an investor here who wants to invest in this country, he's brought in money, but in our opinion, we require at least some verification from wherever this person is coming from. And we are not obligated in law to do that, but out of what we do, it's also a duty for us to ensure that we query from our counterparts whether this person is a subject of interest in their country.
So how are you able to see, maybe this is what we need to prioritize now? You see, like the way you said, you were able to pick up NYS1, NYS2. So how do you prioritize to go after that money?
We have our own normal guidelines in terms of how we carry out the analysis. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have priorities. Very high, medium, and low. Currently, corruption is very high. Terrorism financing will always remain high. So if a report comes, because the way the reporting is done is that the bank will give you a basis for suspicion. If the bank say that the basis for this suspicion is terrorism, automatically that goes on top of the list. If they say corruption, again, it goes on top of the list. And now we're able to prioritize. And look at the linkages, because you'll find a situation where Bank A reports on corruption of an entity, and then you realize again tomorrow another bank is reporting on the same, because you are dealing with people who are generally, they're criminal minds. So they'll want to spread their risk by carrying out these criminal or probably hiding money in several avenues. So again, that's how we prioritize our work.
How rampant perhaps is the problem of financing terrorism?
I won't say it's rampant. And this is a debate that I've always had challenges to argue out. Because when you look at terrorism, particularly domestic terrorism in Kenya, the first question I'll always ask is, a terrorist moving from Liboi to Nairobi, how much money does he need? How much is the fare? 1,000 shillings? He's probably going to spend a night. Of course, they're very discreet. They'll not spend a night in one of the posh hotels. This person is likely to spend a night in some suburb where a lodging is probably 500 shillings. So if he's going to put up in that lodging for 10 days, that's 5,000 shillings. Plus 1,000, and probably upkeep 10,000. You don't need to put that money in a financial system. Yeah? This person could have been ferried by a truck that is carrying cows from the far-flung counties of this country. So again, it becomes very, very difficult, because financing of terrorism is not necessarily through the financial system. It's actually through either facilitators or even sympathizers who are abetting this. And of course, when you look at radicalization, It's more of people being sympathetic to a particular cause. So they're even able to host that person, they're able to move that person around, and at the end of the day, they're able to finance them in ways where the terrorist himself might not really appear anywhere, but a financier is doing that on behalf of this particular terrorist. So I'll still say that the risk of terrorism financing is high in this country for the obvious reasons. We have our own challenges. Our border is porous with Somalia, and all the terrorist groups in the world are in Somalia. Foreign fighters, there are so many foreign fighters in Somalia. There are so many also Kenyans who have been radicalized and moved into Somalia. This is a fact. And this is something that we are fighting as a country.
So how do we tackle this threat?
I think the threat of terrorism is, it requires a concerted effort. Law enforcement has a role to play. The financial sector has a role to play to ensure that funds don't move either from diaspora or from sympathizers or supporters of terrorism outside of our borders. And again, even the society at large. For example, we've had cases of kids disappearing, school-going boys, university students crossing borders into Somalia. How much of that is reported by parents to law enforcement? So again, you realize that it's not just a situation where government has a role to play. All of us have a role to play in fighting terrorism. And of course, the issue of radicalization, we have to look at it critically. There's no difference between anybody who's training someone to break into a bank or a bank system and someone who's really radicalizing someone either in a religious institution. Both are cut from the same cloth. So if the law has to apply, it has to apply across the board.
All right, even as you follow the money, do you have enough technology to be able to track the money? What kind of systems are you using?
Currently, we have systems that are, by and large, we've developed them locally, which are customized to our own situation. The last financial year, we got a good budget where we invested quite a huge sum of money in a data center. So we are now in the process of procuring data analytics software. We are in the process of acquiring a case management software. We're in the process of acquiring software that are purely customized to our work. So I can tell you can come for an interview at the end of next year, and we'll be discussing an FRC that is a world-class FRC in terms of IT solutions that are customized to money laundering analysis and terrorism financing analysis.
Let's look at some of the penalties that are there in law. Are they sufficient to deter money laundering, financing terrorism, or we need to rethink?
The law is perfect. I'll tell you, the law is perfect. For right now, for a financial institution that we find to have broken the law and abetted money laundering, the offense is 25 million, an offense, and for the individual person who either slept on the job is 5 million shillings. And we are not taking away the criminal culpability away. We'll still deal with you, but in terms of penalties, that's how they are. And you saw that we came very hard on the banks after NYS 2.
Yeah.
And you realize they never went to court to challenge that because they realized it might even be more expensive for them to do that.
All right, looking forward, what are some of the things that perhaps you'd want to see the Kenyan people do to help FRC continue tracking some of these illicit monies?
Let me speak as a member of the public. We should not look at anybody who's become rich overnight and say that this person is successful. That's our biggest challenge. You realize for our youth right now, anybody who has money is more or less a celeb. A celeb in the sense that you make money, quick money, and either you want to run for an MCA seat, you want to be a governor, you want to be an MP. And we fail to interrogate that character of that person. Is he a beneficiary of either process of corruption, drug trafficking, the goals coming all over the place? You have seen it in the media. Literally every other person who's been identified as a gold scammer has a certain profile that the youth adore. So that's one. From a societal perspective, we need not to idolize ill-gotten wealth. Secondly, I think we have a role to play because all of us are in this. This country belongs to us. If there's an institution where you believe as an employee, either in the financial sector, name it, a bank, a forex bureau, a betting company, and you really feel that something is not right, either this institution is being misused for money laundering or for other illegal purposes, feel free as a Kenyan, you have an obligation to report that to law enforcement. Because at the end of the day, whatever happens to this economy affects you. And then we also need to develop a culture of compliance, particularly within the reporting institutions, so that it's not, we are not doing this because the law says we do this. We are doing this because it's my duty to do this.
What is the compliance level of financial institutions?
I might not be able to put in percentages, but I think they are, not really think they are complying.
They're obligated to report to you on a daily basis?
The law says that upon suspicion they have 7 days to report. But again, you realize that the 7 days might be a challenge for some of them to really get background information on a transaction.
Right.
But that should not be a challenge because the law also provides for them to report and request for additional time to get the necessary documentation to be able to carry out due diligence. But again, there is a situation where money moves into an account and there's collusion within a financial institution where willingly some people agree to close one eye, money moves out, and the 7th day you comply. Again, the law provides for an offense of willful failure to comply. You actually detected suspicion, but because you are compromised in a way, you decide to delay the reporting.
By the time you're coming in, it's after
Money
the
is
fact.
already gone, it's after the fact.
It's after the
Yes.
fact. All right. There was a time, Kenya was being rated as one of the high-risk places for money laundering. Has that changed? Are we now doing better in terms of how we are arresting money laundering?
You realize that majority of these assessments are perception-based. They are not really empirical. What we have done as a country is that we are currently carrying out a national risk assessment where we want to identify our own vulnerabilities and weaknesses and fix them. The way we are going to fix them is that we'll be able to see almost all the sectors that are vulnerable to money laundering and recommend either policy measures or legislative measures or regulatory measures for that matter that should fix the problem or the vulnerabilities that we've identified.
Our time is up, but I want to just give you a minute to look straight into the camera and perhaps talk to Kenyans. When we talk about money laundering, financing terrorism, how can they come in and how can we be able to stop it?
Thank you very much. Every Kenyan has a role to play to safeguard our own security. And by and large, all of us have a role to play to ensure that our country is safe, our economy is safe, and we are not used for money laundering or terrorism financing for that matter.
So how does it connect with our development if we don't arrest this problem? What does it mean for us?
A lot of repercussions. One, there's no financial institution that can rely on dirty money. Because at a click of a button, if a criminal realizes that it's no longer making sense to have money in Kenya, he'll move that money elsewhere. And of course, those are the reserves that banks depend on to lend. Secondly, we have a reputation as a country. There is no investor who would wish to invest in a country where criminals control the economy. And lastly, corruption for that matter. If we keep losing money through corruption, it means that we will not have money for all the social services that government is supposed to provide. Medicine in hospitals, roads to maintain, free primary education, free maternity. So there is a huge impact on the economy and on everyone, for that matter.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate you giving us insights on what FRC is doing to try and address the problem of money laundering, financing terrorism, and holistically the war on graft. Thank you very much for your time.
Asante sana.
Well, we have been talking to the Director General at FRC, that is Saitoti Maika, who is just giving us details of what FRC is doing in the continued war on graft. Of course, a multi-agency team is working together. They're just one of the players in this particular sector. But like he said, money laundering, financing terrorism, big problem in Kenya, and you and I can be able to help them in the continued war against graft if our countries to talk about any meaningful development. This is where we put a cap on walking the talk. Thank you for watching. My name is Catherine Achenga. Good evening.